Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Sekulow.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the broadcast. Let me start by saying we're going to be joined in the next segment of the broadcast by Pastor Andrew Brunson. You remember he was in jail in Turkey for 2 years, and because of God's grace, the work of the ACLJ, your support of the ACLJ, we were able to secure his release. It's been a great victory, but we're actually going to have him in studio. He and his wife, Noreen, are with us. Before we get to that, though, let me say on behalf of all of us, to those of you supporting the work of the ACLJ, because we ended up with a great month. We met our goals, which is great. Your support of the ACLJ made that happen. So before we get into the Brunson story, I want to get that done and say thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we don't do it often on the broadcast, but when we do it, you all respond, and you are a core group of supporters, those who listen to the broadcast regularly, whether you're a new listener or a longtime listener to the broadcast, or whether you're someone who watches on Facebook or Periscope. So whether it's terrestrial radio, whether it's Sirius XM or Facebook and Periscope, let us thank you. We saw significant numbers increase during the show. And that means that you were responding directly to our ask.
Absolutely.
And again, it's something we don't want to do and have to do often throughout the year, but we do have to do it sometimes. And because of your support, we met those goals. So we have to thank you absolutely so much for your financial support to the ACLJ.
So it was just a little bit, almost a year ago. It was October 12, 2018. American pastor Andrew Brunson was finally released from being wrongfully detained in Turkey. We confirmed our statement that we issued that day says we can confirm that after more than 2 years of detainment based on his Christian faith, Pastor Andrew is preparing to leave Turkey and return home to the United States. As you know, we represented Pastor Brunson throughout this ordeal, and it was an ordeal. You're going to hear from him in a moment about the whole situation. We're going to take your calls. If you have a question for him, we'd be happy to take those. You'll be able to speak to Pastor Brunson and his wife, Noreen. We'll be taking comments in by Facebook and Periscope as well. Look, the plight of the persecuted church is significant, and that's whether it's in countries like Syria and Iraq, in the Middle East, but also right there in Turkey, which was a U.S. NATO ally, and yet an American was held for 2 years. Of course, we thank the president for his work. It was God's grace that got Pastor Brunson out, but the president was fearless in his protection of this pastor and demanding his release, not only publicly many, many times, sending out not only tweets, but also making public statements about this. It took a lot of effort, and the president was willing to put economic sanctions in place on Turkey because of their wrongful detainment. We've never had that experience in all these cases we've had. We've never had, president gets, all these people lob criticisms on the president, but few people say thank you for the work you did in getting these people that were held in captivity free. And I've never seen a president that's done it like this president has, to just be blunt. Putting politics aside, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green Party, whatever you are, this president has made this a priority of getting Americans released and has had great results in that. He takes it very personally. I can tell you that firsthand as his lawyer. He takes it very personally and he engages it very directly.
In my new book, The Next Red Wave, we talk about actually is the difference. We compare Pastor Brunson's case and Saeed Abedini's case and how hard it was to get the Obama administration just to engage. And in Pastor Brunson's case, how easy it was to get the Trump administration to engage at the very highest levels, including the President of the United States, directly engaging with the President of Turkey. And so you compare and contrast what kind of leaders do you want as a country when it comes down to Americans imprisoned abroad. I think it's a pretty easy choice.
All right, we're going to be joined by Pastor Brunson, his wife Noreen. So Andrew Brunson, Noreen Brunson joining us also. You have to understand, for us at the ACLJ, it's next case, and the next case is Pastor Saul. We've been talking about his case on radio and a little bit on TV. We're now trying to raise the level of interest in that case, raise the awareness of that case. He's been in prison in China now for 2 years. He was starting educational facilities. He'd been doing it for years, never a problem, and all of a sudden he got picked up. Same kind of thing, always national security. We've got a petition that's up at aclj.org. We want to present that to Congress and to the UN. Sign it now, aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
Christian pastor John Saw, a U.S. permanent resident, has been wrongfully convicted and sentenced in China. After decades working in China and Burma, providing for the poor, sharing the love of Christ, and establishing schools for impoverished children, Pastor John was arrested and imprisoned by Chinese authorities. Pastor John's wife and 2 sons, all U.S. citizens from North Carolina, desperately want their father released and returned home to America. Pastor John has been unjustly targeted for his Christian faith and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He's now been imprisoned 2 years. At the American Center for Law and Justice, we're representing Pastor John's family, aggressively working internationally and in this country for his ultimate freedom. Stand with us. Sign on to our petition to free Pastor John Saw. You can add your name right now online at aclj.org.
All right, well, this is a real treat for us at the ACLJ. Our team in our media center was able to meet with Andrew and Noreen Brunson just about an hour ago. And for many that have worked on this case involving Pastor Brunson for almost 2 years, this is the first time they actually saw him in the flesh, saw Noreen in the flesh. I mean, they've seen the pictures, they've heard Noreen's voice, but to have Pastor Brunson actually in the studio is important. I think it's really important here to start from the beginning, and that is, Pastor Brunson, how you ended up in Turkey. I mean, you were a pastor, you were trained. Let's talk about how you decided, what was the leading to go to Turkey?
Well, actually, our church asked us to go there. We didn't especially want to go to Turkey. We wanted to go to Egypt, but they asked us to go to Turkey, and we're so glad we did, even though we had some difficulties there. We have no regrets about going there. And
so the idea was the church wanted you to, like a church plant, basically?
Yes, they wanted us to go there. Turkey's the largest unevangelized country in the world, so there's a good reason for missionaries to go there.
Yeah. Noreen, how did you feel when you first started talking about it as a family? How old were your kids when they were about to go to Turkey?
We didn't have any
no kids yet.
We were just
married.
That's right.
So what was your thoughts about that?
I was set on on Egypt. I did not want to go to Turkey. I cried on the plane. I was sure my life was done, but I was just commenting on how ironic it is. I'm leaving Turkey, and now I'm crying that I'm not there.
Yeah.
So God really just tied it to our hearts.
So Egypt was on your heart, though, before, which is interesting. We do a lot of work in the Middle East, and we've done a lot of work in Egypt. But Egypt was on the heart before you went to Turkey.
It was. Yes.
It was. Go ahead, George.
And it was 23 years in Turkey until you were arrested. So, I mean, a total of 25 years. But 23 years you did this work. So your children were born there, raised there, went to school there. I mean, this is where life was in that next phase of your life.
We assumed that we would be there for the rest of our lives. Yes.
What was life like pre-arrest? What was life like for the church, for your ministry, what you were doing, and for your family in Turkey? People, a lot of people have not been to Turkey. It's a popular tourist destination, been a little tough lately for the U.S. But what was life like in Turkey, and what was the church life like in Turkey?
I will just say that there was not a dull day in Turkey. I always say that. Some days were good, some days were bad, but nothing was boring. There was always something changing, something happening. Of course, what we were doing in the ministry is an uphill battle.
Yeah.
But it was always exciting.
That's something to talk about, and that is what you actually, we think of a church plan, it's, if you're in, Charlotte, North Carolina, you can go to one of the suburbs. This is a very different situation when you're operating in a country. So you go to Turkey, Andrew. You're there. How does it start? I mean, how do you start a church plant in? You were in Izmir, Turkey, Smyrna, so we would know it.
So most cities in Turkey don't have a church. They don't have a missionary there. So when we go into a place, what we actually do is try to be visible, so that those who are seeking know where to go if they have questions. So we would just try to, we would open up a place, put a sign up that said church, and often you get negative publicity from it, but we would say, well, at least people now know where to find us. And then seekers begin to come, because there are people who have questions. And everyone around them is Muslim. They've never met a Christian, so they go to the place where they can meet a Christian.
So when you open the door, we represent the Greek Orthodox Church, who's had the Greek Orthodox population of Turkey is down to under 3,000. I mean, it's very, very few. It used to be very large, and they can't even go outside of their facilities without without hassle. How was it received, or how were you all initially received? You said you had seekers. How long until seekers started showing up? Was it instantaneous? Was it months? Or
Within days, weeks.
Really?
Yeah, pretty quick. So everybody there has to be one. This is the difference. Some churches here in the States, people leave one church to join something new.
Right.
Everybody has to be one to Christ there.
Did you get a sense when you're talking about a population that does not really know Christianity? Did you get any sense that there was, when you would first talk to the folks there, that they did have a general understanding? Was it more an inquiry of, what is this?
Most of them have never met a Christian. The only thing they know about Jesus is what Islam teaches about Jesus. So some of them are just curious. Everything they know about Christianity has come from Hollywood, from TV, or from movies. So they really don't know about Jesus.
Yeah.
And the guts of the gospel have been torn out for them. So they don't understand the basics. They've been taught that the Bible has been changed. So you're really starting not just at neutral, but way negative.
Norma, she wrote it on Facebook. She said, prior to your arrest, did either of you, especially with your children there as well, ever feel unsafe while in Turkey? And I think I'd ask this a different way. I mean, you knew you were entering the mission field to go into foreign countries, so a little bit maybe different tolerance for what is unsafe than the average folks who aren't called to do that. But prior to that, and prior to those first 23 years, were there any kind of issues like this?
So I think it's safe for Christians to go to Turkey, especially for tourism. But when you're there doing church planting or a very visible Christian, then you're going to get a different reaction. So anybody who's been involved in a public church plant is going to have threats. We had a number of threats over the years. And there was one occasion when I was attacked by a gunman came to our church. So there can be risk.
Yeah. So the risks are real when you're ministering in this part of the world, predominantly a Muslim world that is, again, has very little knowledge of Christianity. A lot of times, too, links Christianity directly with either America or Israel and makes it very political. I've noticed that, too, in that region. Yeah. So that can be a bar to getting past people. But obviously there was a want. I mean, for 23 years, people kept coming, and you kept the ministry going. So there was a desire for people to learn and a desire for people to ultimately even join the Christian faith.
You know, a lot of people have had dreams of Jesus. Jesus appears in their dreams or an angel and says, go read the Bible or go find a Christian. So he is there. Holy Spirit is there preparing the way. Yes.
You know, it's interesting you said that because we've so many cases that we've been involved in with Muslim converts to Christianity. It's Jesus appearing to them. It's not just Muslims, by the way. It happens a lot. But I mean, I have a friend of mine that's a Jewish Christian and was the same kind of experience. I mean, it was like, and when you talk to him, this is a guy that is just, straight and narrow. He's kind of a black and white kind of guy. But when you talk to him about his testimony, when he talks about Jesus appearing to him, he's not like kidding. I mean, it's not like it was some vague dream. It was like the reality. Here's an interesting question that came in. And again, we're taking your calls as well at 800-684-3110. Kristen asked on Facebook, how has this strengthened your walk with Jesus? So before we get to that, let's talk about what happened. So you're 23 years there, incidents here and there, but nothing of this significance. What happens that leads to your arrest?
It was out of the blue. We were very surprised. We were called into the police station. We thought we were going to be receiving long-term residence permits, which we had applied for. And then they told us they were going to deport us. So we knew that was a risk, that they could deport us. But the idea that they would keep me in prison was, no one had thought that was possible.
And so how did that, Noreen, how did that come down? So you think you're going over there for a long-term visa, basically, and it's the opposite.
Yeah, we were shocked. We were shocked to hear, that we're being deported.
You were both picked up at first, right? Well,
we both walked down to the police station. We're told, yes, you're going to be deported, but then you can't leave. We're holding you until you're deported. And there was a developing situation that first day, to be honest. We didn't understand fully what that meant, how they were going to hold us until they deported us.
Then they put us in a deportation center together for 13 days, and we had no contact with the outside world. We didn't know what was happening.
When did you? That was the next thing I was going to ask. So when you go to the deportation center, both of you are held for almost 2 weeks at that point, and then we'll get into a little bit more of this after the break. But I think it's important for people to understand that you're going in with this expectation of one thing, a visa grant, and you end up in a deportation center. You had no idea that was going to end up with your husband being incarcerated. No clue of any of this going on?
No, although when we arrived to the deportation center, and then they checked a box that for terrorism, not just threat to national security, and my heart stopped there. I thought something is wrong here.
Yeah, so this is typically, unfortunately, what happens, and Jordan, we've talked about this a lot, becomes everything's a national security risk.
Yeah, everything, including, we went, when we translated the charges, the official charging documents, the terrorism that they were talking about, that Noreen was just talking about, that Pastor Brunson was charged with, actually translated from Turkish into Christianization.
Right.
That would be terrorism or a national security risk to a country like Turkey. And again, so we have to get out of our Western mindset, look into the Muslim world and some of these more authoritarian regimes, and see how they will use your Christian faith or your ministry and turn that into an act of that you could be terrorizing the public by sharing that faith.
You have to understand, for us at the ACLJ, it's next case, and the next case is Pastor Saul. We've been talking about his case on radio and a little bit on TV. We're now trying to raise the level of interest in that case, raise the awareness of that case. He's been in prison in China now for 2 years. He was starting educational facilities. He'd been doing it for years, never a problem, and all of a sudden he got picked up. Same kind of thing, always national security. We've got a petition that's up at aclj.org. We want to present that to Congress and to the UN. Sign it now, aclj.org. That's aclj.org. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
Christian pastor John Saw, a U.S. permanent resident, has been wrongfully convicted and sentenced in China. After decades working in China and Burma, providing for the poor, sharing the love of Christ, and establishing schools for impoverished children, Pastor John was arrested and imprisoned by Chinese authorities. Pastor John's wife and 2 sons, all U.S. citizens from North Carolina, desperately want their father released and returned home to America. Pastor John has been unjustly targeted for his Christian faith and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He's now been imprisoned 2 years. At the American Center for Law and Justice, we're representing Pastor John's family, aggressively working internationally and in this country for his ultimate freedom. Stand with us. Sign on to our petition to free Pastor John Saw. You can add your name right now online at aclj.org.
I'm going to play for you the audio of the Brunsons praying for the President of the United States in the Oval Office on TV live. It was a Saturday, I think. Is that right? It was a Saturday. CeCe Howell's joining us. And recognize that voice, of course. But that was quite a day, and it was quite a week getting to that point. We left with you being in the deportation proceedings, and then ultimately 13 days in prison, and then I want to go take a call because people are calling in 800-684-3110. Before I get to the call, though, you saw that mark and it said terrorism. And Noreen, you said you knew at that point that this had taken on a whole new dimension or another dimension, I would say.
I felt that something was very wrong. They typically deport people under threat to national security.
Yep.
That's a broad category, kind of a catch-all. But when they were specifying that and under those conditions that Turkey was in at the time, it scared me.
You know, they accuse you. I don't know if you got a lot of it there, but they accuse you of being a spy. That was Andrew. They were accusing you of being a spy for the United States. That was part of what was coming out. And then I don't know if you know, you were in jail, so you didn't know this, but I was on the phone with the president when he said, he was angry at Turkey. I mean, I was there with calls this president, as you know, on these things is unapologetic in getting the Americans out. And besides the one where the lira tanked their currency, and he said you were going to be this is going to be the most expensive pastor Turkey ever kept. And I think that obviously the economic sanctions had an impact. It was a guy that obviously did the release, but the president was very, very, very direct. But I remember at one point he said, "You think this guy's a spy? I'm more of a spy than he'll ever be." That was from the president of the United States. Let's go ahead and take a call and then go right back to the story.
Yeah, let's go to Myra in California on line 1. Myra, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hi, Myra. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you.
Sure.
Pastor Brunson, I prayed for you, and what's next?
What's next for the Brunson family?
Yeah, so first, I want to thank everyone who prayed for us. It was such a great support for us, and we're astounded by how many people prayed for us. So thank you very much. What's next is, we still want to see the church grow in the Middle East, and so we're trying to find ways to encourage that, to train the next generation that's going out. And I also have a great burden for, as I've returned to the States, I have not had a burden for the States in the past. I've been focused overseas, but just to see the next generation strengthen, because I think it's going to become more and more difficult for believers to stand unapologetically for Jesus in an increasingly hostile culture. Yeah. So I think that we need to strengthen the next generation.
Noreen,
so I'd like to be involved in that.
Yeah. Is that what you think's next?
Yeah, there are several things along those lines that are kind of just growing in our hearts, and so we're waiting on the Lord during this time.
Okay, and it's a good thing to do. I mean, you got to take your time when you come back from something like this. Cece, let's talk about for a moment. We know about they're taken into detention center. We've been through this a number of times on other cases. But how did the first call come into us for help?
I actually believe it came in from Pat Robertson's office.
I think it was Gordon contacted me.
And so I got Noreen's number and I called her immediately.
You're exactly right. You said I remember that.
Yeah.
Gordon called me and said that Gordon Robertson called me and said, we've got a situation with a wonderful couple. They've done a great work in Turkey and they've got a problem. And at that point, I thought it was going to be 3 phone calls and we'll get them out.
Right. And it certainly wasn't.
It was
2
not.
years later, from October 7th, 2016 to October 12th, 2018. So it was over 2 years of daily just working and advocating and going to D.C. and going to the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention at the United Nations, talking to Noreen every day of what's going on and keeping up with the trials that happened in Turkey.
Which brings up an interesting aspect of it. So, Noreen, you know what's going on every day, and Andrew, you don't, because you're in the jail, and you could see each other. Was it once a week is when they allowed a visitation?
Yes.
Yeah. And we've got a situation right now with Pastor Saul where basically almost no visitation, so he has very little idea what's going on. A little bit from his mother occasionally. Each one of these cases are different. This is a question that's come in from Jim on Facebook, and he said, how did the people from your church in Turkey respond to your incarceration?
I
don't know. I wasn't.
I'm so proud of them. So of course there was fear, and there was a real unknown because this was new territory. So the question is, what would happen to others? What would happen to the church? There was a lot of media attention that was very difficult. But overall, those who stayed really pressed in to prayer, to worship, and actually became stronger. So I'm very proud of them.
All right. So you're in prison. Church is responding. Let's go ahead and take a call, and then I've got a whole series of questions I've been wanting to ask you.
If you want to ask any questions to Pastor Brunson's wife, Noreen, again, call 1-800-684-3110. We are live. This is a unique opportunity to do that. 1-800-684-3110. Jerry is calling in from Rhode Island online too. Jerry, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hello, team, Pastor and Mrs. Brunson. Mrs. Brunson, do you recall when Jay asked Colonel West to lead all the listeners in prayer on a Friday while he was in a really bad detention situation?
Yeah.
And by Monday, he was lifted up out of the bad one to the next one. And do you see how God worked to expand prayer, power prayer, including using the president and people who understood we're going to pray, and then they saw the results? Do you see how you were used?
Yes, we're just really humbled by what God did through the prayers of his people. Absolutely.
That was an interesting one because I remember that we were all very concerned, obviously. And, I always tell everybody in these cases, and I think you'll understand it from our end, we as your lawyers have to approach this very clinically. You can't get emotional about it. I mean, it's hard not to, but you've got to be very clinical. You got to say, okay, this is what's happened. What do we do? This might happen. What's the next plan? I mean, I had dozens of conversations, with the president. More than dozens. This was something that was on his mind. It was on discussions. I'd be in the Oval Office on another matter, and you would come up. It was just, this was the kind of a constant refrain of what was going on. But I do remember when Wes was sitting in the chair that Noreen's in, or maybe it was Andrew's chair, that we were very concerned about that. And we just said in the middle of a broadcast, we're talking to millions of people, we just said, let's stop in a moment and pray. Wow. And make some big impact. What is the length of the prayer that we're going to play? About 1 minute and 10 seconds? All right, so you have not seen this you haven't heard this on radio, Facebook and Periscope, you just did. This is the culmination of the release, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, was this prayer in the Oval Office to the President of the United States.
Lord God, I ask that you pour out your Holy Spirit on President Trump, that you give him supernatural wisdom to accomplish all the plans you have for this country and for him. I ask that you give him wisdom in how to lead this country into righteousness. I ask that you give him perseverance and endurance and courage to stand for truth. I ask that you protect him from slander, from enemies, from those who would undermine. I ask that you make him a great blessing to this country. Fill him with your wisdom and strength and perseverance, and we bless him. May he be a great blessing to our country. In Jesus' name, we bless you. Amen.
And I just want to pray that the Spirit of the Lord would rest on the President, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord. Amen.
That's going to do it for the broadcast today. Let me encourage you to do something, and that is, as we've been talking to Andrew Brunson, his wife Noreen, and their great victory that we saw in that case, let's not forget that we've got other cases we're handling right now, and your prayers and support make a huge difference. Let me encourage you to go to aclj.org, sign that petition for Pastor Saul, but also support the work of the ACLJ. You can do that at aclj.org. See you next week.
Christian pastor John Saw, a U.S. permanent resident, has been wrongfully convicted and sentenced in China. After decades working in China and Burma, providing for the poor, sharing the love of Christ, and establishing schools for impoverished children, Pastor John was arrested and imprisoned by Chinese authorities. Pastor John's wife and 2 sons, all U.S. citizens from North Carolina, desperately want their father released and returned home to America. Pastor John has been unjustly targeted for his Christian faith and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He's now been imprisoned 2 years. At the American Center for Law and Justice, we're representing Pastor John's family, aggressively working internationally and in this country for his ultimate freedom. Stand with us. Sign on to our petition to free Pastor John Saw. You can add your name right now online at aclj.org.
American pastor Andrew Brunson faces up to 35 years in a Turkish prison.
Pastor Brunson, I hope you can hear us. We'll be helping you at some point. He's a totally innocent man.